Radio Voice Italia, Philadelphia.
Class is now in session. Christopher Columbus University is on air from Philadelphia and broadcasting worldwide from within the shadow of Marconi Plaza. Radio Voice Italia is proud to present a recurring segment with civil rights author, professional researcher, and renowned Christopher Columbus expert, Robert Felix Petrone, Esquire.
Buongiorno tutti and welcome to Radio Voice Italia's Christopher Columbus University, where we teach you the truth about the greatest hero of the 15th and 16th centuries, Christopher Columbus, and update you on the international efforts to preserve Christopher Columbus's legacy. I'm your host, il professore Robert Petrone. Today on our Christopher Columbus University segment, we have some news updates. In Washington, D.C., President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have still issued no apology or any other mention of their offensive statements and actions of damnatio memoriae against Christopher Columbus and Italian Americans. President Biden is the first American president to push aside Columbus Day so that it shares the day with a day honoring indigenous peoples, without consulting the Italian American caucus of the Senate, nor with any Italian American leaders, thus reaffirming his lack of support for Italian Americans, their sacrifices and contributions, his ignorance of the 1891 lynchings that gave rise to Christopher Columbus Day, and the true history of Columbus as a champion of the tribal peoples of the Americas. Biden's blatant disregard for the worth of Italian Americans as an ethnic minority group, and his minimalization and dismissal of Italian Americans. Vice President Harris not only ignored the statement of Tony Henson of the Illinois Confederated Tribes, himself a member of the Cherokee Nation and president of the Native American Guardian Association, expressing support for the celebration of Christopher Columbus Day. Vice President Harris, in addressing the National Congress of American Indians, made a vague reference to a, quote, federal holiday on October 11th, 2021, but did not mention Christopher Columbus Day by name. Instead, she condemned, quote, European explorers for having, quote, ushered in a wave of devastation for tribal nations, perpetrating violence, stealing land, spreading disease, referring to Americans' history as a shameful past. She made no mention, however, of how Christopher Columbus not only did not participate in any wave of devastation, violence, land theft, or spread of disease, but actually fought against the Spanish nobles who tried to perpetrate these atrocities against the tribal peoples, and succeeded, making him the first civil rights activist of the Americas. As of the recording of this broadcast, more than 2 weeks later, neither Biden nor Harris nor any other representative of their administration has offered any apology to Italian Americans or any response to a letter sent out in the second week of October 21 by the Conference of Presidents of major Italian American organizations, expressing the outrage and disappointment of the nation's Italian American community. In Boston, Massachusetts, the Italian American Alliance is circulating a petition on change.org to save Columbus Day and our Italian heritage, and asks all to sign it and forward the link to friends, neighbors, and especially on Facebook and social media. The petition can be found by searching on Google for some other search engine if you don't like Google, for Italian American Alliance petition. In Rochester, New York, a city resident is suspected of sending hate messages using racial slurs to Lyell area community leaders, attempting to pit Lyell area neighborhood leaders against each other. Anti-Italian slurs like, quote, dead wop walking, were used in the messages when referring to Silvano Orsi, the founder of Rochester's Little Italy District Association. The Rochester Police Department, the FBI, and the Gates Police Department have been informed. The suspected individual or individuals are also apparently creating fake Twitter and Facebook profiles under Mr. Orsi's name to harass people, and they have also allegedly attempted to manipulate police with false crime reports against Mr. Orsi. President Orsi has stated, quote, the extreme level of hate and Italophobic shenanigans being leveled against me, Italian Americans, and Little Italy recently in the city of Rochester is cause for alarm, and it is truly unprecedented. There appears to be a group of deranged individuals who are attempting everything possible to stalk and harass me and Little Italy with the primary goal of character assassination. They claim to be facilitated by the current city administration. They also constantly and unabashedly attempt to smear Little Italy on the news media's social media sites. We've asked authorities to investigate, end quote. In West Orange, New Jersey, the Italian Tribune, one of the country's largest and most influential Italian American weekly newspapers, has printed an article by its publisher, Buddy Fortunato, former New Jersey General Assemblyman, chairman of the Committee on Independent Authorities and Commissions, and vice chair of the Transportation and Communications Committee, who recently re-erected one of Newark, New Jersey's 2 Christopher Columbus statues. Mr. Fortunato's father-in-law, Asa Lanya, himself a former New Jersey State House photographer and White House photographer, had erected one of the two Newark statues a half-century ago, and Mr. Fortunato had preemptively taken it down and put it into protective storage during Newark Mayor Ross Baraka's bigoted authoritarian campaign of damnatio memoriae against Christopher Columbus and the city's Italian American residents. Mr. Fortunato recently re-erected the statue in Skylands Park in Augusta, New Jersey, making it the first of the Columbus statues torn down during the Marxist riots of 2020 to be re-erected. The park in which it has been re-erected, used by the St. Louis, Missouri minor league team, was renamed Columbus Field. Mr. Fortunato's Italian Tribune article addresses President Joe Biden's October 8th diktat, pushing aside Christopher Columbus Day, writing to the president that his actions constituted, quote, a pandering mess, and inviting residents from the Biden administration to, quote, personally talk about how it can play a role in correcting the unfounded total misconception about Christopher Columbus instead of playing to a radical segment of its political base, end quote. Mr. Fortunato emphasized that, quote, indigenous peoples should be recognized, but considered the president's actions, quote, an affront to Italian Americans who made the greatest contribution to Western civilization, which is the culture or society that is these United States of America, but also the envy of those seeking freedom throughout the world. The article goes on to condemn Biden for, quote, removing the tribal peoples of the Americas from the melting pot and, quote, encouraging them to remain on the reservations which were forced on them, not by Columbus, but the American government, end quote, specifically by the founder of the president's own party. Mr. Fortunato's article mentions how European leaders have characterized Biden as a, quote, lamentable president for his October 8th proclamation and other catastrophic policy decisions in the past 8 months, such as one parliamentarian of Spain who characterized the bringing of, quote, civilization and freedom through Christopher Columbus to the Americas as the most important event in history after the Roman Empire, as demonstrated by the many island nations of the Caribbean that celebrate Columbus through both monuments and national anthems. Finally, the article contrasts the Vatican's previous petition to canonize Christopher Columbus as a Catholic saint with its current silence on the global Marxist campaign of damnatio memoriae. It also condemns the bicameral and bipartisan Italian-American congressional delegation chaired by New Jersey Congressman Bill Pascrell for their utter silence and fecklessness during the Marxist campaign of damnatio memoriae. You can read Mr. Fortunato's article in the October 21st, 2021 issue of the Italian Tribune, which you can find at italiantribune.com and searching for From the Desk of the Publisher. In Rockaway County, New Jersey, the Rockaway Board of Education, which had previously voted to replace Christopher Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day, reversed its vote last week in a 5-2 vote, restoring Christopher Columbus Day to the school board's calendar. The only board member who voted to keep Columbus Day off the calendar were Rachel Brooks and Tanya Shields. Neither gave any comment on their bigoted and ignorant votes. Italian American One Voice Coalition Executive Board Member Andre Domino said the organization was very pleased about the 5-2 vote and described Christopher Columbus as, quote, an iconic symbol to Italian Americans, and stated that, quote, as Americans, there's an attack on our history and heritage, end quote, making it important to preserve the holiday with the name it was originally given, quote, because he united the continents and changed the world with his discovery of the New World, end quote. In New Haven, Connecticut, that city's Italian American community has followed in the footsteps of Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and West Orange, New Jersey, in filing a federal civil rights lawsuit against the city of New Haven for acts of discrimination against Italian American residents, including the removal of that city's Christopher Columbus statue from Worcester Park in June of 2020, after a city representative has issued a letter declaring that the statue will not be returned to its former location. The plaintiffs, the American Italian Women for Greater New Haven, attest in the suit that the city, through Mayor Justin Eckler and the Board of Parks Commissioners, among others, violated their rights to due process and equal protection under the 14th Amendment. Representative Patty Cofrancesco attests in the suit that the removal constituted a, quote, denial of enjoyment of public accommodation, and that the city, quote, unlawfully discriminated against them on the basis of their national origin by denying them full and equal enjoyment of the goods, services, facilities, privileges, advantages, and accommodations of Worcester Square Park, end quote. After the city voted to remove the statue, Italian American residents of New Haven inserted a time capsule into the base upon which the statue once stood that includes the names of the donors who had the statue erected in 1892. In Westboro, Massachusetts, the select board voted 3-2 to reject the proposal of that city's Diversity and Inclusion Committee to eliminate Columbus Day. Christopher Columbus Day remains as a municipal holiday in Westborough, Massachusetts. In Billerica, Massachusetts, the select board has voted unanimously to keep and honor Christopher Columbus Day in that town as well. In both Westborough and Billerica, Massachusetts, thanks goes out for that state's Italian American Association's strategy team and the Order of Sons and Daughters of Italy in America for providing the tools and guidance to residents to win their cause before the town boards. So for the substantive portion of today's program, we have a very special guest, Mr. Mark Wonwolf, alumnus of the Board of Directors of the Native American Guardian Association and current president of the Native American Redskins Nation. Mr. Wonwolf, welcome and thank you so much for coming on our show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, it's great to have you here. Now, you identify as a Chiricahua Apache, yes?
Yes. So in our language, I'm a Chihine Inde, which means a red paint people of the Apache Nation. We are a bit of history. So the Apache aren't really called Apache in our own language. The word for Apache is actually derived from a Zuni word meaning the enemy. So, but most people don't know the Inde people, so they know us by Apache. So we have adopted or accepted, I should say, the term Apache. Most of us, anyways. But you will find some Apache that find it derogatory or offensive. So, tread lightly. So
and so the term that you prefer is Chiricahua?
So yes. So the Chiricahua Apache. It's the Apache Nation is broken up into many different what they call bands, and then you have clans of each band. So the Chiricahua, there's a Mescalero, the Jicarilla, the White Mountain. Now there's the Fort Sill Apache, which were the Fort Sill Apache are actually Chiricahua Apache because they were imprisoned at Fort Sill. And then the government has renamed them. So that's a bit of a segue into one of the reasons why we're having the discussion that we're having today, and because Native Americans have been marginalized for centuries, and to the point that many Native American tribes or whatever have to get federal recognition in order to be considered Native American. I say that because we all know that the Chiricahua Apache existed. I mean, Geronimo was one of the most famous Chiricahua. There's, Geronimo, there's Cochise, these famous or maybe infamous, according to U.S. history, Apache chiefs or leaders. We know that they were Chiricahua Apache. We've seen movies about them and things like that, but the U.S. government does not recognize the Chiricahua Apache as a recognized tribe. According to the United States, the Chiricahua have been extinct. But the truth of that is the Chiricahua were absorbed into parts of the Mescalero band. They were renamed. The Fort Sill Apache. There's also the San Carlo Apache. There are many Chiricahua. So the Chiricahua were kind of, pushed out of the public spotlight. And that's just a little bit of an insight on how delicate Native American identity can be in our own land. The Inde people, the Inde really means, in my language, means the people. And then if you research around, there's the Lakota, the Dene. The Dene is a Navajo, which are close relatives to the Apache. So most people know them as Navajo, but Navajos know themselves as Dene, which means the people in their, in the Dene language, and that's you'll find most tribes when they refer to themselves, they didn't have a tribal name, so to speak. It was it's just a word in their language for, a person or a human being. And that's no different in the Apache. So the Zuni were I guess sworn enemies of the Apache, and apparently in our history, the Europeans or the white settlers or whatever encountered the Zuni before the Apache, and so perhaps, I mean, I'm just imagining this, but perhaps they say, okay, well, you guys are the Zuni, and so who are those guys over there? And they say, oh, that's the enemy, which they say that's the Apache. So they say, oh, they must be the Apache tribe. No, it's a word for the enemy in their language, and so our history is sorry for that. Our history is so it's so beautiful in that because unless you put yourself in the place of people, we take so much for granted. I mean, they didn't have the magic of Google or Google Translates or they didn't have dictionaries to from English to Western Apache or English to Zuni. So they just assumed that these are the tribal names of these people, and so they must be the Apache. And most people, like the Navajo Nation, they've adopted the Navajo name, which was similar. It's more than likely I don't know particularly what language it came from, but it's more than likely a derogatory name for that particular tribe. The Sioux, for example, also they're Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota. That's in their language. But the Sioux is a Cree word for some people translate it as snakes in the grass or something like that, but it's literally translated as people who rise from the grass like snakes. So it was more like the Sioux were very cunning warriors, and they kind of hid amongst the grass, and they would just pop out of nowhere. And so that was it was not necessarily a derogatory, almost like like a respect in their warrior, their cunningness. It is the way, at least that's the way I interpret it. But there's plenty of Lakota and Dakota people who want to take offense to that. Same as many Apache or many Indian people want to take offense to the word Apache. Same as the Navajo people, many Dene they can take offense to Navajo. So, which is not surprising that many Native Americans take offense to Columbus Day.
Yeah, so it's interesting from what you're telling me. How the government has claimed that the Chiricahua are extinct, but really the reality, the facts are much more nuanced than that. It just goes to show that this whole idea of cancel culture, or what I call damnatio memoriae, which is sort of Latin for the obliteration of memorials or obliteration of a concept, is nothing new. That this has been happening to your people for a very long time, and it's happening to our people now. And so, given your curriculum vitae, I thought it would be helpful to get your take on that controversy about, for example, the discovery of the Americas. That is to say, when I say that, the bringing to light to the rest of the world the people and the land masses of the American continent, vis-a-vis the Native American experience, and in light of today's cancel culture. What are your thoughts on these things?
So yeah, it's very interesting because when I went to school and we learned about Columbus but I had also known my own history by the way I was raised. My great grandmother, my grandmother, my mom, and all my family members. The history that we didn't get in school, so to speak, Native American perspective, and history is an interesting thing because history is usually told by the victor, and rarely do pop culture even care to know what happened to the other side. But I didn't have the luxury of not caring because it's my history, and so it's interesting when somebody says, "Oh, Columbus discovered." I mean, the way they teach it, Columbus discovered America, and it's as if this land was uninhabited, and that's the sort of the way it's pushed in school. We all know that the Native Americans were here. I mean, Columbus acknowledges that the people he describes them as um, what do you call it, kind and welcoming people. So so obviously he's not trying to deny that people were already here. And so then you have to kind of fit everything together and say, okay, well, Columbus discovered, he's an explorer, obviously from Europe. And, at the time people thought the world was flat. They didn't even, they thought they could go around and get to India. And they didn't realize it was a huge honking, continents, plural, here in the pathway to get to India. So, so there's no denying that that there was a discovery to some people. So I think what most people take offense to, I would say, is most Native Americans and most I guess the woke, if you will, the woke people take offense to is the discovery of a place where there was already inhabited. To be honest, personally, I don't take offense to that. I mean, I acknowledge that my ancestors were here. I acknowledge that, and I acknowledge that there was a guy who thought he was on his way to India, and found out that he wasn't. Or found out that maybe he was on his way, but he ran into something else. So I can acknowledge that, and I guess from my perspective, I see it from both sides because I don't believe in cancel culture. I believe that for better or for worse, the introduction of the European people to the the people here. Some people call it Turtle Island. Some people call it we didn't call it the Americas. It wasn't. It's our land. Our ancestral land. So the introduction of the people that were here and the people from Europe is key to the history of the world. I mean, it's almost like from a micro perspective, as an individual. We look at our history and our mistakes and our triumphs, our things that we have done in the past, and it makes us up. It makes us who we are today. And so we have to take the good with the bad. And the history of this country, as on a larger scale, is no different. We just have to take the good with the bad. We can't just look at one aspect, because I'll tell you this. I'll give you this perspective, because I know, like, a lot of my friends, Native American friends, they have a different perspective than me. I'm a bit of a, I don't know, the black sheep, if you will, amongst the popular, the popular culture of victimhood these days, because that's what people, they want to be victims. They feel like there's respect in victimhood, so they have to, even to the point where they revise history. So I don't know enough about the Columbus history, because honestly, I accept that this guy was from, I mean, the most important is this guy was from Europe. He sailed across on his way to India, found the Americas, found the people here in the Americas, and that's all fact. That's the most important fact that we have, because what it did was it brought Europeans in the acknowledgement of the native people here, and now we have such beautiful relationships as a result of that. For sure, there was things that happened in between. I can tell you, a ton of history about things that were done specifically to my people alone, to the Apaches, and it's not something that we look fondly on or things like that. It's not something but like I said, you have to the history is history. History is written. It's already done, and no sense of us rehashing it now and fighting. We're fighting this battle over Columbus and what he may or may not have done, when nobody here on this earth today was alive back then to know for sure what was said and how it was said, and and things like that. I mean, it's the same with Thanksgiving. Like they want to cancel Thanksgiving because they want to revise it and say it was Thanksgiving was a massacre and things like that. And there was recently a friend of mine. He's a Narragansett Indian, no, I'm sorry. He's a Wampanoag. And so he and the historians of the Wampanoag Indians, as well as the Narragansett tribe, got together with some other tribes up in the up in the upper part of Connecticut, Rhode Island area, and they got together with some tribes and PBS and American historians, and they told the story of Thanksgiving from the Wampanoag's perspective, the Narragansett's perspective, the Europeans' perspective, the Puritans' perspective, and there were things that I even found out that I didn't know, and I thought I was pretty well versed on that. For one thing, there's this famous picture of the first Thanksgiving, and you see everybody's there. The Native Americans are there, and the people have their guns, and the Puritans have their guns and their muskets and stuff like that, and natives have their bows and arrows and stuff like that. And some people interpret that picture as, oh, they were about to fight. It was a war, it was a massacre. But what we found out through the history of the tribes and in the documentation from the Puritans and everything was that the Native Americans weren't really invited to dinner. So the Puritans were celebrating their bountiful feast or whatever, and they were firing their weapons off in the air. And the Wampanoags, because they had made an alliance with these people, they thought they were under attack, so they came to aid. And then they ended up basically crashing the party, and then they said, oh hey, well come on, have a dinner, have some feast or whatever. And that's a very simplified version of what, but the PBS, like the PBS put that together, and like I said, they had they had the Wampanoag historians, the Narragansett historians, the Pequots, they had a bunch of people, because the thing was, the Wampanoag and the Narragansetts were sworn enemies, and so but there had been another group of explorers that had come prior to the Puritans that had unleashed some sort of virus or something like that on them. Not intentionally. I want to make sure that they say that, but obviously the immune system of the Native Americans weren't as robust or used to that, so they decimated quite a number of their tribe. I want to say nearly 60% of their tribe, which made them vulnerable to their enemies, because everybody's kind of jockeying for space and resources and things like that. So the Wampanoag watched the Puritans from afar for the better part of the year. People were dying off and things like that, and then so they wanted to. Some people wanted to help them. Some people wanted to stay away. Some people thought that they have weapons that they could, that we could ally ourselves with, and that way we could, kind of be protected from our enemies. Because, I know a lot of Native Americans want to believe that we were all like a kumbaya, society, but there were 1,500 tribes, here in the Americas, and not even counting the ones in South America and Mexico and South America, not even counting those. There were about 1,500 tribes, and we weren't all friendly to each other. I mean, obviously the Apache got our names for a reason, so we were the enemy, right? But it's a. I don't mean to get off too much on a tangent of Thanksgiving and everything, but it's just this cancel culture and this revisionist history is not a productive way to operate here in 2021. We're fighting battles that don't need to be fought, and I have so many friends who are Italian, who are Irish, who are basically European, and for me to sit here and say, well, it's your fault that there's only 5 million Native Americans left out of 100 million Native Americans, and it's very unproductive, and it's nobody's fault who's here today. It's nobody's fault.
Right.
You know,
I don't even want to interrupt you because everything you're saying is so fascinating. I mean, that I think was one of the most touching Thanksgiving stories I ever heard, about the Narragansett coming to the aid of the Pilgrims that they thought they were under. I mean, that's beautiful.
The Wampanoag, yeah.
I'm sorry, excuse me, the Wampanoag. I got that backwards. I love that. So no, I don't think that you're getting off topic at all. I think talking about Thanksgiving, there's a movement to cancel that as well. And I think you mentioned it when we had spoken prior. I think that it may have something to do with the fact that Thanksgiving is, in many respects, a Christian holiday. But do you celebrate Thanksgiving, you and your family?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's not even so much. It's not even so much that it's not necessarily a religious holiday, but it's a day that you give thanks. I mean, come on, who can be against a day of giving thanks for the things that you have? I mean, it's a lot of things that we take for granted. I mean, I just bought a Jeep Wrangler. I've been wanting a Jeep Wrangler for a long time, and I just bought one a few months ago. And I mean, I have the means. And I have my health. I have so many things to be thankful for, and a lot of times people just want to concentrate on the things that we should be, crying about, things that we can't change. I would love to have grown up, in my community amongst the Apache. I don't speak my language because of some of the things some of the policies and things like that have happened here. The Apache were sworn enemies of the United States at one point, and so I wish that didn't happen.
Yeah, you and I don't want to interrupt you, but I just wanted to say you and I had that exact same experience because during World War II, there were posters that said, "Do not speak the language of the enemy." And there were caricatures of Germans, Japanese, and Italians with voice bubbles above their heads speaking their respective language. And so my grandparents never spoke Italian. Their parents spoke it to them, but they never spoke it when they left the house. And therefore, my parents never spoke it. And therefore, I didn't speak it until I took it upon myself to study it on my own, and now I speak it. But I understand, and Italian Americans have across the nation of my generation have that exact same experience. So we know exactly what you're talking about. I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating because I didn't know that that was because so that is a history that we share. That the Native Americans in general were forbidden to speak their language. I mean, they went to a point where they sent Native Americans to boarding school. The mantra was kill the Indian, save the man. And this practice of sending Native Americans to boarding school, taking the children and sending them to boarding school, was perpetrated by the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church ran the majority of these assimilation, or indoctrination schools or whatever we want to call it. They cut their hair. They forbade them to speak their language. They dressed them. They dressed them the way they wanted to. They felt that they needed to be dressed. And so, so there is a lot of negative history that is true. I mean, we can't deny that these things happen. And so some Native Americans do associate that with Thanksgiving and Columbus, because Columbus obviously came before, and basically but according to the Wampanoag historians, Columbus wasn't the first explorer to visit these lands. There were some like Nordic people or something like that they had encounters with and stuff like that. And obviously the pilgrims that we know for Thanksgiving were not the first, because of I don't know what happened to the first explorers, and they don't really go much into detail whether they died off or whether they were absorbed into the tribe somehow or to different tribes, or did they move away from the East Coast or whatever. But the 2 points of history that a lot of Native Americans look at, as the Native American Holocaust, that's the word that they use. And I don't really know another way to describe or to categorize it. If you think about, there was once 1,500 tribes, 100 million Native Americans, and now there are 575 federally recognized tribes. and 5 million Native Americans. And then even, the Chiricahua are supposed to be extinct. I didn't get the memo, but we're supposed to be extinct, and our identities hang in the balance of government legislation.
Right.
So, this is it's not an easy way and not a good way to live our lives and things like that. And so you can't necessarily diminish that term Holocaust. But to point out one particular point in history that because Columbus came here, this is why this all happened. I mean, you can't throw everything on Columbus's shoulders, and we can't change that. We can't undo it. So I don't believe in canceling. I do believe in trying to learn as much history about it as possible, because the way I look at Columbus Day, and there have been other explorers, Amerigo Vespucci, and tons of other explorers that have come here and things like that. The way I look at it is, this is the time where we came together. The United States is famous for their melting pot. And, we're this melting pot. We're a nation of different cultures and different races and ethnicities and things like that. And that would not have happened but for these explorers. So
that is so true. Thank you. Yeah, I don't want to cut you off, but we're running short on time. I could listen to you for hours, and that's why I've said virtually nothing, because I just, having you as like a guest lecturer today has been a super thrill. I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for you coming on the show today. You've been a wonderful guest and very, very enlightening. And I hope, maybe we can have a conversation again. It would be lovely, because you have a lot of great things to say, and I've learned stuff today too. And that's today's class. So for more news, articles, and resources about Christopher Columbus as the first civil rights activist of the Americas, icon of Western culture, paragon of Catholic virtue, and greatest hero of the 15th and 16th centuries, please visit preservecolumbus.us. That's Preserve Columbus, rendered as one word, .us, and post a little note of appreciation for our webmaster, Tom LaCosta. I'm your professore, Robert Petrone. A presto!
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon.
We choose to launch a Jody Della Barba segment on Radio Voice Italia.
We choose to go to the moon.
Stay tuned for the historic landing on Radio Voice Italia this autumn. Radio Voice Italia, in your orbit and always reaching for the stars.
Jody Della Barba. Radio Voice Italia. Philadelphia.